the Executive Director at the American Kratom Association. Thank you for joining our webinar tonight. We'll let a few more people get started and get on the call, and then we'll have Dave Herman, our chairman, start us off. So we'll start here in just a minute or so.
Hello, I'm Dave Herman, Chairman of the American Kratom Association. Welcome to our webinar, the AKA Action Transparency Updates. There are always items we work on in private that allow us to communicate the Kratom community needs. Some of these are very sensitive and we can't share them, but when progress is made and we can share information without violating trust, we hope to share with all of you the status of this work. Our presentations today will be from Congressman Mark Pocan from Wisconsin, Lynn Mailer from Hogan Levels Law Firm, Dr. Jack Henningfield from Penny & Associates, Mac Haddo from Upstream Consultants. We all thank our guests for their help and participation in this webinar. We also want to recognize the contributions of our Executive Director and our Board of Directors, whose everyday hard work guides our actions and made this webinar possible. We're extremely honored to have Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin joining us tonight. Congressman Pocan has been a dedicated champion of Kratom and fearless in his support for protecting people's rights. Congressman serves as a U.S. Representative for Wisconsin, 2nd Congressional District, following 14 years in the Wisconsin State Assembly. Representative Pocan is a small business owner, union member, and a lifelong advocate for progressive causes. In the 115th Congress, he serves on the House Appropriations Committee, where he sits on the Subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education, and the Subcommittee on Agriculture. I'm honored to introduce Congressman Mark Pocan. Congressman?
Hi there, everybody. Welcome tonight. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea where we've come from with this issue, a little history of it from a congressional perspective. I was asked to do that, and then offer what I know where we're at, although of course your folks will know a whole lot more to give more in-depth updates following this. But let me just share how we got involved in Congress on this issue. So we have a family friend, my husband and I, in Colorado, who found that she had gone to a lot of doctors for a number of ailments, but one in particular, and wasn't getting resolution, and she discovered Kratom, and it was one of the few things that really helped her, and that's where I first heard about it, so from a good family friend. And when we heard that this ban was going on in place, we actually reached out to the American Kratom Association to say, hey, is there something we might do? Because often in Congress we do letters and we try to get members to have an agency look at something maybe a little differently than they're looking at it. And this was back in September, may even been late August last year of 2016. At that time, Susan Ash and your lobbyist at the time came by my office in Washington. We talked more and more about it and kind of came up with a path we thought might make sense. In the past, I've had a good experience with congressional letters let's face it, legislation doesn't pass a whole lot these days in Congress, but we do have letters. And I thought it was really important that if we were going to try to make sure the DEA wasn't going to expedite the scheduling of kratom, which is what they were doing at the time, we should get this letter going. So I recommended to your lobbyists at the time that we should find a Republican. A bipartisan letter is always better, even though we had a Democratic president, we had a Republican Congress. Bipartisan is always good. And we wound up finding Matt Salmon, a representative from Arizona, to co-lead the letter. We circulated it, talked to some of our colleagues, and for a letter like this, I was very, very impressed with the turnout. You know, often you might have 15, 20 colleagues sign something. We actually got 50 colleagues, 50, 22 Republicans, 28 Democrats, so a really good bipartisan split that we sent a letter on September 30th of that year, and you know, that I thought was really positive. On the Senate side, there also was a group of 11 senators who sent a letter, and that was led by Orrin Hatch from Utah, so a Republican in the Senate. So I thought, you know, we approached it in the right direction, and we basically said, hey, you know, you're doing this without, you're trying to schedule kratom as a Schedule I drug. You're doing this without any public comment whatsoever. At the time, the acting administrator of the DEA was Chuck Rosenberg, and we wanted to make sure that they did the right thing. So on, we put the letter out, and on October 13th, about, I'm trying to think from the date, it must have been about a couple weeks later, they announced that they were going to withdraw the expedited scheduling, and that they would solicit public comments through the end of the year, through December, I believe it was the end of the year, but it was December 2016. And while that doesn't stop you know, any future threats at that point to the DEA scheduling kratom as a Schedule I, it was an important win at the time because at least we put a pause on it. We acknowledged that they needed to have information from the scientific community to understand what was going on, and they could more fully have the interaction between the DEA and the FDA because we were having some interaction problems with both of the agencies. You know, interestingly, you know, my gut, and I'm not sure if this is, I can't say this is 100% certainty, but my gut told me what was going around around this time was synthetic heroin was being sold in stores, and one of the elements that was brought into it was kratom. So I think what happened is some over-ambitious and not necessarily scientifically minded folks decided that anything that was made up in a synthetic heroin must be bad, and I think that's how this whole process started. I can't say it definitively, they've never told us that. There were some reports of some people who died from other things, but happened to have kratom in their system, very small number. But I'm quite sure it had something to do with the other, just from my interactions with agencies over the years. So now, you know, we've had the public comment. We've been kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. Most recently, I now serve on the Appropriations Committee, and on the Agriculture Subcommittee, we have oversight over the FDA. And we had the new FDA Commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, in, who I believe had been in for like 2 weeks. But to be honest, he was very, very knowledgeable for someone who's been there for 2 weeks. Of course, he had experience previously with the agency, but very impressed with where he was at for, again, 2 weeks experience. And I asked him a question during that hearing about whether or not the FDA was going to be doing their 8-factor analysis on kratom, which is how the DA is supposed to go through a process to actually schedule a drug like that. And they said they were moving forward with the analysis. Now, we know that there has been, by your association, an independent analysis that was very thorough and very thoughtful, and has been submitted, so that, you know, if they do the same as this, I think you're going to find that people are going to realize that, you know, obviously it shouldn't be a Schedule I drug, and we're hoping to have progress on that. So I think, Dave, you know, that's, I just wanted to offer that brief history, I think is what you asked me to do. I'd be glad if you have a question or two to take that, but I wanted to at least provide people with a little bit of the timeline of what's happened, the unusual nature of a bipartisan letter in both houses moving this forward, and the fact that we're still pushing on this and trying to make sure that they know we haven't, you know, forgot about it, that it's still something important, and that we don't want to have this be improperly listed as a Schedule I drug.
Congressman, thank you. We can't tell you how much we appreciate your support and help. In researching questions, there was one that kept coming up over and over again, so let me just ask it to you.
Sure.
What can the kratom community do to help you as a member of Congress to preserve and protect the freedoms of consumers to have access to kratom in the future? That's the big burning issue.
Sure. I'll tell you, more than ever, it's contacting your member of Congress and your senator. If you have a personal story, all the better. But it's not the mass-produced postcards, generic emails that all say the same. Those get lost. I'll be real honest. But what gets our attention is when a thoughtful letter, a thoughtful email, it's the same these days, the same as a thoughtful letter, or a phone call to either the district office or the Washington, D.C. office of your member of Congress and your senator. Quite honestly, other members probably won't take the calls because we all have over 700,000 constituents and we have limited staff. But if you make that call and just say, hey, look, we're still watching this issue, we hope you will too, maybe you could reach out to the DEA or the FDA would probably be the right person at this point. Honestly, whatever Dave tells you is the message you should send on it, but what I'm suggesting is it's that communication with your elected officials so that it's still on their radar screen, their staff's radar screens. And if you have an ask, that'd be great, because if they could make a call or send a letter individually, to this point, I don't think there's a group letter that needs to happen. We work with your association. If there is, we'll jointly figure that out. But for now, I think just making sure they know you're available, that you're someone in the district who cares about it. And one caveat, I know I said a good letter, and a good letter does make a difference. However, because of the problem with sarin and other poisons that were sent years ago into Washington, into offices in Washington, if you send a letter to your Washington office, we will not get it for about 3 weeks. It has to be screened. Now, the local offices generally will get it right away, so, in your home district, if you send something. That's why I say sometimes an email letter is just as good, but we'll get it instantaneously, and you won't have to worry about if that time period, if something happens in the next 3 weeks and they haven't gotten it, it may not get through. So that's my recommendation. Just, be very visible. People these days are really visible, so you want to make sure you break through the clutter so you're still on the front of mind for your member of Congress and your senator. And just keep that communication up, because your personal advocacy, you're the boss, right, of your elected official. And that's why that communication is very important.
Congressman, thank you so much. We appreciate your leadership. This is a very passionate community, and I think they'll take to heart everything that you said to us.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you. Again, however we can be helpful, we want to be.
Oh, thank you so much. Next, I want to introduce Jack Henningfield. Jack is one of the world's leading experts on addiction and the behavioral, cognitive, and central nervous system effects of drugs. He counsels clients on assessment of the abuse liability of new central nervous system acting drugs and formulations, evaluation of potential application of Controlled Substances Act to new products, and the assessment of the tamper resistance of novel formulations and development of risk management approaches. Jack frequently liaises with the Food and Drug Administration on issues concerning drug scheduling and addiction, and has presented frequently to FDA advisory committees. He has received numerous awards for his research and policy contributions to the understanding and control of tobacco addiction. He joined Penny Associates in September '96 after 16 years of public service at the intramural research program of the National Institutes of Health, NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, where he studied the abuse, liability, and cognitive effects of a broad range of drugs and contributed to the development of improved methods for abuse liability assessment. He's been a member of the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine faculty since 1978 and is presently adjunct professor of behavioral biology at the Medical School's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. It's clear to me he's just not qualified. Jack, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much. Stated more succinctly, I'm a scientist who believes in science in search of in service of humanity. And I think, like most people, I've had in my own family members with addictions and other problems. I've had family members that have needed medicines, family members that have benefited from natural products. There's no one-size-fits-all for helping people. And I want to just tell you how I got into this, though, because I'm a scientist that studied addictive drugs and opioids, real opioids, for more than 40 years. Kratom was fascinating because here was something that looked like it had a much safer profile. and really could help people and provided an alternative. And it was clear for many years now that there have been many people in Southeast Asia and increasingly in the United States treating ailments that they could have maybe were treating with opioids and other drugs. And they found that kratom provided acceptable and effective self-treatment. And so I believe it's really important we have alternatives available for people. And I think going forward, when you're thinking about what you can do, I think remember that NIDA, FDA, DEA have to work on this together. And anything that you can do to help show them the path and show them why the world is better, having access to kratom will be very helpful. Don't overstate the case. There's no one-size-fits-all for everybody. Now, I met with, I got involved with the American Kratom Association last August when the DEA announced a scheduling proposal that they were going to essentially ban it by placing it in Schedule 1. My advice was that you should protest it with all you've got because it's the right thing to do, but it's too late. The train has left the station. You'll never get it reversed. But my colleagues and I at Penny Associates believed it was the right thing, and initially we jumped on and helped them pro bono. Thanks to support of a lot of people out there, maybe some of you on this call, they have the support, they have the funding to bring on the amazing team at Hogan Lovells, and you're going to hear from Lynn a little bit later, and our team, and they helped change, make history. When DEA actually reversed itself and at least temporarily stated its proposal. Where things are now is that the cloud still hangs overhead. So we have an opening, and we've got to take advantage of it. We met, meaning myself and representatives from the American Kratom Association with the National Institute on Drug Abuse and the Drug Enforcement Administration. I emphasize the science. I discuss kratom in the big picture of the opioid crisis. And remember, that's something that's actually killing more than 90 people per day, and we have yet to document a true kratom poisoning death. As I've emphasized to them, not finding it doesn't mean it hasn't happened and will never happen, but it means that the signal is very low. It means that kratom is not a public health emergency. The other thing I emphasize is that there are now 3 different surveys that indicate that most people using kratom are using it for some benefits. They're not using it to get high, and they're not suffering problems with it. And some percentage of people, we don't know what the percentage is, but some percentage of kratom consumers are using it as alternatives to opioids. Either they were treating their pain with opioids and didn't like that, and were concerned about addiction, and they were pleased to find something that was satisfactory and an acceptable alternative, or in some cases they had problems with opioid abuse and addiction. And they found, as millions of people have found in Southeast Asia, that this can be an effective way for many people to break the opioid addiction and stay off. And so I emphasize that right now we do not have documented a public health emergency that warrants emergency scheduling and banning of kratom. But I emphasize if kratom is banned, we could create a public health emergency. I said in that case, we drive many people back to opioids, licit and illicit. And what is really scary is people, maybe like some of you, who say, you know what, I don't want to get back to opioids. I'm going to find kratom. Well, the black market then rushes in to fill the void of the lawful market. And the black market is very scary. The black market is a market. They're competitive. They may offer you kratom that they say is even better than the one you've been getting. Maybe it's kratom they lace with fentanyl. That's scary, and it's a real concern. I'm convinced that the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Food and Drug Administration are taking these issues very seriously. I'm also working with them on the real opioid crisis. They're taking that very seriously. One of the questions they have to be considering is the following. Is kratom part of the opioid problem, or is it possibly part of the solution? And at this point, we have no evidence that kratom is part of the problem. And I believe that NIDA looked at its surveys, the same surveys I looked at in our 8-factor analysis, and probably found the same thing that we did, which is there is no looming health emergency associated with kratom. They likely found what we also did in surveys, which is that if you ban it, you will drive people back to opioids and or to the illicit kratom market, which will surely emerge. And that will not likely be the market that we now have available. The other thing I emphasize is that the American Kratom Association and others support balanced regulation. Regulation that does not ban kratom or overly restrict it, but regulation that helps make sure that people get what they pay for, that their products are not adulterated, and that they're pure, that they're labeled and packaged appropriately. All of that is possible if it's regulated as an appropriate dietary substance, or even like coffee for that matter. There are many products that provide great models for kratom regulation. But if it's banned, none of those potential protections are possible. Then the only thing we can do is pray that the black market won't do what it always does. So those were some of my main messages, and they were supported by the science that we got together in our extensive 8-factor analysis document that is on the internet. I emphasize that the various surveys that have not documented kratom problems do not mean that there are no kratom problems. It means that the kratom problems are a very small signal, and we want to keep it a small signal. And the way to keep the small signal is appropriate balanced regulation, honest information to people, and let marketers that market products appropriately and safely, let them provide the products. Much better alternative than the black market. One other thing that's fascinating is kratom does have molecules, including nitrogenine, that have some opioid-like effects. And what this means is that a lot of the benefits that people attribute to kratom are probably real. Now, they have not been documented to the level that FDA would need to prove kratom as a medicine. So we have to be careful and not make those claims. Nonetheless, decades of use probably in the United States and much longer in Southeast Asia indicate that it really does help people with a lot of the ailments. And so, and some of the basic science also supports that. So we have something that I think we have some science, we need more science. And that brings me to my last point that was an important one, to the National Institute on Drug Abuse. A lot of us think that regulation is best guided by science, and that as we go forward, we want to better understand what kratom does and what it doesn't do, so we can give people even better information. Well, the only way you can let the science go forward is if you can get the product and you have support of science. If we place kratom in Schedule 1, it is very difficult to do the research. And then we don't get the regulation that we need, we don't get the research that we need, we don't get the protection in the marketplace we need. So I think what everybody on this call and more can do is make the case, make the positive case, and make it to your congressman, make it to courageous congressmen as we just heard from Congressman Pocan. The other thing that's going on that's important and relevant is the Governor Christie-led opioid commission. I think if we all put politics aside and focus and be hopeful, because he does have some people on that commission that have long histories and substance abuse. And I think what we've got to do is make sure that they understand as broadly as possible that kratom is part of the solution to the opioid problem, not the problem. And moreover, that there are people right now that are where we want them to be, off of opioids, with alternatives to opioids for pain, with alternatives to opioids for abuse. We don't want to drive them back. So those are my main messages that I carry forward. I hope, I pray, and I believe that NIDA, FDA, and DEA are really trying to find the right path, and I think if we all work together, we can help them do that.
Dr. Henningfield, thank you. Your science and your work give all of us hope. It's helped immensely when we talk to people to share your 8-factor analysis, and it's just been a godsend. Thank you very, very, very much.